Well, now we've seen that in the medieval period, Christmas became an official Christian institution, and the church gave its full support. Significantly, much of the pagan practice of Christmas continued. Even as late as the 14th century, they were still electing lords of misrule to reign over the 12 days, so that we have a period during which the pagan customs and the Christian approval were molded together and continued side by side. With the Protestant Reformation, mainly Luther and Calvin, there came a big change. Luther struggled with anything Roman Catholic, and of course Christmas was a Roman Catholic creation. He also struggled with the pagan roots of Christmas. Nevertheless, Martin Luther gave in, as most state churches did, because when you're a state church, you regard yourself as including everybody. You pastor a country, and therefore the tendency in state churches is to keep public customs and sentiments. And so Luther did celebrate Christmas reluctantly, but especially he loved his guitar and singing songs and carols to the children. So he kept it. Calvin, on the other hand, in Geneva, did the opposite. And Calvin strongly opposed Christmas and Easter, because the Bible is opposed to festivals of any kind. The New Testament, Colossians 3, if you want to look it up. And so Calvin in Geneva wouldn't have anything to do with Christmas. And Calvinism, in the form of Presbyterianism, came to this country, but to Scotland, not so much to England. And the result is Scotland has no Christmas. They celebrate Hogmanay, or the New Year, but they don't celebrate Christmas. Presbyterians don't, they follow Calvin. And John Knox was Calvin's man in Scotland, and he persuaded the Scots to drop Christmas altogether. As did a later time when the Presbyterians nearly took over England as well as Scotland in the Civil War. And when Cromwell came to power and the royal family was abolished, and King Charles has lost his head in a crisis, then what happened was that legally Parliament in Britain abolished Christmas altogether. Of course, you can't abolish popular sentiment as easily as that. And in the country areas particularly, they kept up some celebration of Christmas. But officially, it was now abolished in England as well as Scotland. However, you know, the Civil War led to a Republican Britain with Cromwell as the first protector or head of it all, and it only lasted a few years. And the people wanted a king again, and they wanted Charles II back on the throne, and they got him back on the throne, and he reintroduced all the royal family's support of such carnival activity, and Christmas was back on the agenda. In the 19th century, as I told you earlier, the Christmas as we know it really came to be, with the trees and the decorations. And gradually, these things crept into the church towards the end of the 19th century. Until then, in the 20th, it was quite common for a church to have a Christmas tree right in the place of worship. I was amazed a few Christmases ago to find a Pentecostal church in which the church had a huge Christmas tree and the church itself was decorated with Christmas streamers and so on. And so gradually the church has capitulated to the popular desire to go on celebrating Christmas. And indeed the churches began to cash in on it themselves. For example, they replaced the Christmas Mass on Christmas morning with Holy Communion on Christmas Eve, and found they got more taking bread and wine on Christmas Eve than at any other time during the year. And even evangelical churches today can put on a Christmas Eve communion. And churches put on carol services and sang carols instead of hymns. And so gradually churches gave in, and what has been called the cult of the crib began. And that was that churches should have a model crib with the baby Jesus in, and Joseph and Mary, and donkeys, and sometimes camels, and all sorts of creatures. And they used to make a big display of the crib and make it a place of devotion and veneration. And from there, the cult of the crib spread into society. And the nativity play was born, especially when children were expected to act out the story of the birth of Christ, leading to some very amusing situations. When you're trying to make little children act like adults, you can expect trouble. I think of one nativity play in a primary school where the three kings came on, and the first one said, "Here's some gold for the baby Jesus." The second one said, "Here's some myrrh for the baby Jesus." The third one said, "And Frank sent this," and presented the third gift to the baby Jesus. Another nativity play I recall where Mary and Joseph, Mary being great with cushion, arrived at the inn and said, "Is there room for the inn?" And little Joseph said, "You can see my wife is nearly ready to give birth to a child. We need a room." And the boy playing the landlord had forgotten his lines and said, "Come on in, you can have the best room in the house for Mary." And the whole thing was getting off course. Fortunately, the boy playing Joseph had great presence of mind, and he pushed his head in through the door and came back and said to Mary, "You should see the state of this inn. It's not fit for you. We'll be better off in the stable, come on." And turned the whole play round again to the great delight of the parents watching. But the Christmas story is not for children, it's an adult story. The Bible was written for adult believers. Anyway, that's how Christians came to be involved. And this has led up to another crisis. In America, you had the churches deeply divided over Santa Claus and Christmas. On the one hand, the Presbyterians again from Calvin, and the Baptists, and the Quakers, together raised a howl of protest against churches accepting Christmas. And it's often from those quarters that we still have a protest. The mainline denominations tended to bring Christmas in. The free churches at first tended to keep it out, but most of them, Methodist Congregationals, gave way, and I have to say Baptist Salvation Army and even Pentecostals have given way and usually celebrate Christmas in some way or another. Which raises the whole question of where are Christians today and what should be their attitude. And we have a choice before us, either to take it in and try and keep it somehow well behaved, or to reject it and not even try. Or to put the situation quite bluntly, either we can try and put Christ back in Christmas, or we can take him out of Christmas and let it go its own way as a pagan festival again. With Britain increasingly secularized and the second most godless society on earth, Japan being the first, according to a poll of the nations, that we are the second most godless nation on earth. That's not religious, just godless. And so we're up against a changing situation that if it goes on as it is, the trend is entirely towards a secular Christmas that has more in common with the pagan origin than with anything specifically Christian. I have to be honest with you, I'm in the second group. And I don't observe Christmas and I don't preach it. I talk about it, I'm talking about it now. But I believe the safer way is to free Christ from all that's come up around Christmas. And I'll tell you why I have come to that conclusion. It's a bit startling, but that Pentecostal church, which was in Croydon, where I preached at Christmas time, though I was horrified to see all the tree and the decorations right inside the church. And I did a thing that I've often done and asked the Lord questions. I call it interrogatory prayer. I hope you practice that. You've heard of intercessory prayer, where you pray for other people, but interrogatory prayer is when you ask the Lord questions and wait for an answer. I found that a very helpful form of prayer, but a very startling one when the answer comes. And in the middle of that service, I said, Lord, what do you feel about Christmas? And he reminded me that I had a photograph album at home, which was produced by my mother, who was a very keen amateur photographer. She used to win competitions. And this album is of me and my life, from a little baby right through to a boy. And when I show it to people, they say, oh, what a lovely baby. And I hate it. I want to say, I'm not a baby. You have to relate to me now as I am now, not as I was then. Much easier to relate to a baby. They don't answer back. You can coo over them and you pick them up and cuddle them, but they don't fight you. Not usually, anyway. So there was this album, and I had it at home. And I thought, why should the Lord remind me of that? And then I realized that he wanted to say to the people, I'm not a baby, not now. You have to relate to me as I am now, or it's not a real relationship. Now I realize that cooing over a crib is not a real relationship, because it's not with a real person, it's with a doll. And if you want to be related to Jesus now, you have to relate to him as he is, a full-grown man, with his character, what it is. And when all the world is so excited about a little crib with a doll in it, Jesus is saying, I'm not like that now. I want a relationship with you that's real, between you and me as I really am. And I shared that with the congregation. because it came to me as I sat there on the platform. The other thing that has had a big influence on my thinking was that years ago I met with some leading Christians in this country, and we decided to engage in interrogatory prayer to find out more about our Lord. And together we said, Lord, we'd love to know you better. Would you please share with us some of your own feelings? And we then made it quite specific. Is there anything that makes you feel sick? Which is an unusual question. And I'll never forget the moment my blood runs cold almost. Suddenly, from more than one person in that circle who were praying, just came one word: Christmas. And I think from that moment, I began to have serious thoughts about it. Now, there's nothing wrong with a family festival, nothing wrong with family reunions, nothing wrong with having a happy time together. And if that's the way you want to celebrate the cold, dark winter, do so. Don't make Jesus the excuse for it. That's my plea. Don't think that he's excited about it. How important it is for Christians not to think, what do the churches say or do, but what does Christ himself think or feel about it? Try asking him and see if he gives you the same answer he gave us on that occasion. But find out what his real thoughts are. Do you know that far fewer people are converted at Christmas than at any other time of the year? That's because most evangelists are not busy over Christmas. They're home with their families. And they find they can't get appointments over Christmas to hold a crusade. And so they seize the opportunity to have a bit of family life. There are fewer people. There are more people taking bread and wine at midnight communion, but far fewer coming to Christ. He has a very raw deal out of it all. I just leave that thought with you, because every Christian today must, I think, face up to the fact of Christmas. We can't get away from it. It's all around us. And we have to decide what we're going to do about it. Well, now, on the back of all that, let's go back to the Christian story of Christmas and look at it afresh. It's much more than in a school nativity play. And so I want to begin now, in this second talk, a look at the biblical Christmas. And you find it in the Gospels. And the story is an amazing mixture of natural and supernatural. And how seriously you take the supernatural part will have a big effect on how you celebrate Christmas. The natural part is really quite ordinary. There was nothing very different about the birth of Jesus, except for one feature. After some hours of pain and struggle, Mary brought forth her firstborn boy. That birth was quite normal, except for one feature. And I mention this because we're adults together. Her hymen, Mary's hymen, that protected her womb, was pierced by a male from the inside. Whereas in every other case, a hymen is pierced by a male from the outside. But that's the only difference I can find in the birth itself. It was not a miraculous birth. It was an ordinary birth after hours of labor and in not very nice circumstances. It wasn't in a stable. That's part of the myth. It wasn't in a cave. Though if you go to Bethlehem today, they'll show you a cave in the crypt of the big cathedral there, which they believe to be the cave where Jesus was born. They also show you a spot on the floor of the cave marked with a silver cross where Mary's milk was spilt. It's quite objectionable, the whole thing. He was born in an inn, but not in a room in the inn. There was no room in the inn, but he was still born in the inn. Because if you go to a Middle Eastern inn, even today, you have a big square wall with no windows in it, surrounding the inn, pierced by two big gates, or a big double gate at one side. And when you go in, you see rooms all around the inner side of the wall, and all the windows face inwards. And in the middle is a space with troughs for water and mangers for food for the animals. And all this is for security and safety in a dangerous world. You take your animals and your family into the gates, and then you ask, is there a room for us? And the clear biblical record is there wasn't a room available, which meant that they had to do what others had to do, and that is camp in the courtyard in the middle, where the only place to put a baby was one of the troughs. That's the picture. So Jesus was born under the stars, in the open air, in the courtyard of the inn. Do you see the picture now? Most Christmas cards have got it altogether wrong, either a stable or a cave or something. There's no word stable in your Bible. He was born where the animals were spending the night, and his family. It's a very ordinary story of taxes, poll taxes, and a pregnant fiancée of a young man. He was probably about 17 or 18, and she would be 15. That's the normal age for betrothal in those days. And there they are. Why are they so far from home? The answer is, she was pregnant before marriage. And that was in those days, as it still is in many circles, a disgraceful event. And she would be boycotted in her hometown of Nazareth. Nobody would help her. They wouldn't talk to her. They would just leave her alone. And so she had to give birth somewhere else. And since Joseph, her fiancé, had to go to Bethlehem for the poll tax because he belonged by his ancestry to that town, she had to go with him. And a 70-mile journey on a donkey is not a thing that a woman advanced in pregnancy would normally undertake. But she went. Now, it's amazing how many myths and legends have grown up around this birth. We had shepherds who came to see her. Well, there's nothing mythical about that. But then came wise men. And it simply says, wise men. But legend has said they weren't men, they were kings. They've even given them 3 names. And the origin of that whole thing is that they brought 3 gifts. And therefore it's thought there must have been 3 of them. And they must have been royal. Who else would come to a king? And they've been given the names. Well, all that's just not true. It's fiction. So you have this strange mixture of fact and fiction. And all the fiction isn't included. Many of Jesus' own cousins were assassinated because he was born in Bethlehem. King Herod was jealous, and he ordered the killing of every baby under 2 years to make sure that this baby born to be king of the Jews wouldn't survive. When did you last see that on a Christmas card? The soldiers of Herod slaughtering the babies. Must have been dozens of them, and most would be related to Jesus, because the people who'd come to Bethlehem to be taxed were all of the same extended family. Did you ever hear that preached about at Christmas? It's all part of the true story. But we select from the story what we like, and we then add to it anything that improves the story in our imagination. Oh, we even sing about it. Did you ever sing Away in a Manger? And about the baby that never cried? No crying he makes? Rubbish! The only way a baby can let its mother know that he's hungry is by crying. And to think that Jesus was so holy that he never cried. It's a ridiculous idea. But we've sung it heartily in children, or at least got our children to sing it. And whenever you see the picture of Jesus' birth, you see golden halos over the baby. It's a symbol of glory, but it was never seen by anyone. And Joseph and Mary. By the way, I have a real admiration for Joseph. Named after the Joseph of the Old Testament, he was a dreamer as well. And he got messages from God in dreams. And the first message he got was when he discovered that Mary was pregnant. He was horrified. And he even thought he'd have to break off the intended marriage and have a proper divorce from his fiancée, because betrothal was serious then. Well, Joseph believed the dream when God told him, I'm the father. And for the first time in history, such a thing. Fancy Joseph believing it. Yet he believed it. And the very next morning, he married Mary to cover up, even admitting or acknowledging that the baby was his at great personal cost. I love Joseph. He doesn't say much in the story, but he does an awful lot in response to dreams. We're going to have to stop there, have another break, come back, and we'll go on with this story in the next talk.